This is the second part of the two-part series on developing an HR strategy. In the first part, I talked about the importance of strategy, what is strategy, who is responsible or should be responsible for the development of an HR strategy, and I gave the first two steps of my analogy of developing a strategy like a GPS navigation system. I talked about finding satellites or knowing where we are. I talked about entering the destination where we want to go. In this second part, I'll talk about defining the boundary conditions, calculating the route, following the directions, how do we know that we got there, and calculating or recalculating to get around unexpected surprises. Right after this. Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? The third step in defining a strategy, or actually the third step in using the car navigation system, is a step that most people, when I ask them what's the next step, I mean, everybody knows that you have to enter a destination, but when I ask what's the next step, they go calculate. And they miss a step that many people may not even know that exists in your navigation system. So, if there's one thing you can get out of this two-part series, is that there is one more thing that you can do with your navigation system. And I call it the boundary conditions. There is a place in your navigation system where you can say that you want the route to meet a certain boundary condition. This could be the shortest route, if you care about miles. This could be the fastest route, if you care about time. By the way, shortest route and fastest route are not necessarily the same. Fastest route may take you over a highway, but it's a little of a detour. While the shortest route may not take you over the highway, but you will go through a lot of lights. That's just an example. You can ask for a toll-free route. Take me in a route that does not have any tolls. One of my daughters doesn't like driving on a highway, so she can actually enter "Don't take me over highways." So a no highway route. You can go with a scenic route. The boundary conditions can be the speed limit, for example. So there are different things that in the navigation system you can define as what are the boundaries before you calculate. So you know where we are, you know where we want to go. But before you calculate the route, here are things that must or must not be on this route. What does that mean to general strategy? The boundary conditions could be a budget limitation. It could be a time limitation. This needs to be done within 3 years. So, we're about to launch a new product. We're about to develop a new component. Okay? Back to my semiconductor days. Back to develop a certain component. It has to be done within 2 years. That's a boundary condition. Has to be done within no more than $3.5 million. A budget limitation. We cannot allocate more than 7 engineers in a certain discipline. Resource limitations, or any other resources for that matter. Any other limitations. You need to... I use the word limitation, but this can also be the opposite, and that is, it must use X, Y, or Z. We rarely see a boundary condition like this, that it must use something, because typically when, you say it must use this machine, why does it have to use this machine? Well, because otherwise we just bought this machine for no reason. Well, that's a different problem. Okay. I remember that a possible requirement and must have or must use was it must use all of our components and none of our competitors' components. And that's a tricky one. It's tricky because if you force a company to use components from the same company for no good reason, you might be actually hurting yourself. And one of the companies I work for insisted that we're going to use our own production line, even if our own production line was not really set up for the type of product that we were going to build, and using somebody else's production line would have made more financial sense, more profit sense. It didn't matter. It was, you must use our production line. And that's something that could be part of the strategy. It must do something. But for the most part, boundary conditions are the things that you must not do, or, lines that you cannot cross. What does that mean to HR? Again, budget could be one of them. Legal consequences, and I'm not saying that a boundary condition is everything has to be legal, but, a boundary condition could be whatever we do, we should not get anywhere near where employees might feel the need to sue the company for what we're doing. It could be growth capabilities in terms of, it's very easy to say we're going to build this new business unit in the company. We need to hire 1,200 employees in the next 3 months. It's a great statement to make, with one exception. You're not going to find interview and put in place 1,200 new employees. I don't even think that Amazon can do something like this, Amazon or Google or any of the largest companies on earth. So there are certain boundaries that you must consider. Growth in number of employees cannot be more than 5% a month or something like that. Whatever we do, layoffs cannot be part of it. So you can see what I mean when I say boundary conditions, and specifically in the HR strategy area. So think about what are the lines that cannot be crossed in this strategy. Because if you want to be creative, you need to come up with really, really, really crazy ideas. But how do you know that those crazy ideas are ideas that you should be pursuing? Because not everything that's crazy is good. Some things are crazy and bad. So define the lines, define the boundary lines of how you can get from where you are to where you want to be before you start making the plan itself. Well, step 1, we defined where we are. Step 2, we defined where we want to be. Step 3, we defined what are the boundaries to get from where we are to where we want to be. Step 4, calculating. That's me trying to do an impression of a navigation system. Never mind. Calculate the route. In a car, it's based on where you are, where you want to go, and the boundaries, whether it's, you want to take the scenic route, the short route, the fast route, or whatever. In a general strategy, it's really the same. It's what are the boundaries, and how do we calculate a route that falls within those lines, that doesn't force us to cross any line. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, what if there is no way to get from here to there? I remember I started working for Texas Instruments back in 2002, and that was back in California. Our office was up in Santa Rosa in a 2-story building. It was a nice office. It was very simple. You knew where you find anything. Then I moved in 2003 to the mothership, the Texas Instruments Forest Lane facility that I think can host, I don't know if it's 12,000 people or something like this. It is a 1.5-story building. And when I say 1.5, it's because about half the building, maybe even a little more than half, is only a 1-story building. And then the rest of it is 2 stories, simply because it's kind of on a little slope there. And I remember coming in there and asking a person, I would go through the south lobby and ask them how to get to wing J2 or J1. If you're in TI, you know what I'm talking about. And, somebody would start telling me, so what you do is you take this main corridor and then you turn No, don't do that. Actually, go through Wing D, and in Wing D there is a conference room D1 that connects to another conference room. Don't do that. You can't get there from here. Well, obviously you can, and it's just a matter of how, but sometimes there might just not be a way. We said where we are, we defined where we want to be, we defined the boundaries, and there's absolutely no route that can be calculated between those two. There is no route that would get us from A to B within those boundaries. And if that happens, you need to go back to, not to step one. The reason I'm saying not to step one was because step one, and this is why I recommended step one would be done independently and before you even start the process. Where you are is where you are. That would not change. You may want to change where you want to go. What's your destination? You may want to relax one of the boundary rules. Don't make that decision very lightly. I mean, don't make it out of convenience. Well, I spent 3 minutes trying to find a path from A to B within boundaries C, and I couldn't, and therefore we're not going to do it. We can't do it. We need to change the destination, or we need to relax the boundaries. No, give it some real thought. Give it some real creativity. Use your best minds. Brainstorm over it. Be careful before you make that determination that you can't get that there from here. But if you do, go revisit, and I don't have a priority to whether what you revisit is the destination or the boundaries, but go revisit one of them, or both of them, and flex them, change them so that you can find a way. And it has to be an iterative process that takes you through, we're going to flex something in our boundaries and then go back to calculating a route. And again, if we're still pretty confident that there is no route that would meet that boundary, then maybe we change another boundary rule. Maybe we change another, maybe we move the destination a little again. If you want to drive your car from here to Europe, that's a great idea, with one exception. There's going to be a part where your car needs to be a boat or an airplane or something, because there is no way from here to there. And so maybe we relax the rule by saying we're okay with the car being taken on board a cargo ship or something. Just, crazy example that came to me now. But let's say that you do find it. How do you define that route? How specific do you go? Try and not be too specific and be more generic. So the strategy needs to be more of a guiding tool than an exact turn by turn, which is kind of where the analogy slightly breaks with the navigation system, which is a turn by turn. There is an article written by Kathleen Eisenhardt in 2001 in the Harvard Business Review. It's called Strategy as Simple Rules. And so if you just look up Strategy as Simple Rules, even if you don't put Kathleen Eisenhardt as the name, this article will come up. And I love that approach to strategy. What she says is that strategy really has to be very, very simple rules. That again goes into the a strategy should not be a 40-page document. It should be a one-pager. She recommends 2 to 5 rules, different rules, not more than 5 rules. And she gave 5 types of rules. And your 2 to 5 rules can be any combination of those, or all of them could be just one type. But these are the 5 types. The first type is how-to rules. This is how do you do X, whatever that is. How do you hire new employees? Again, this is I'm kind of going to the HR route. The second is a boundary rule. And this kind of falls in line with the boundaries that we defined before. So, as long as you define the boundaries, this would be where you write them. Here is the boundary. It cannot exceed a certain budget. It cannot exceed a certain time, and so on. And be careful with what you put as boundary. Is it a real boundary, or make sure you don't put a boundary that people would just break, but make boundaries that make sense. It can be a priority rule. So X has to happen. If X and Y, then X happens first, or we prioritize X. Timing, certain things have to happen within a certain time, not before a certain time. It just rules that relates to timing. And it can be relative to something else, that training will always happen when you hired a more than 10 employees, just as an example. That's actually a timing rule. Even though, you can call it a how-to rule. Exit rules. This is, most rules so far talked about how you do something. Exit is how you stop doing something. When something happens, then you stop doing this. Okay? When you reach a certain number of employees, then you stop hiring. Well, that's kind of an obvious one. So, I'm not sure that you need to use the 2 to 5 rules or one of the 2 to 5 rules to state when you stop hiring by saying you stop hiring when you have enough employees. But you should have, or you can have exit rules as well. So think about those 5 types of rules. Again, I would refer you to the original article by Kathleen Eisenhardt in Harvard Business Review in 2001 that's called Strategy as Simple Rules. Just read more about that and think about how it applies to you. Now, when you calculate that route, really, one thing that comes out of it is you will need to create the systems, the processes, the protocols that would allow you to fill that strategy. So, I don't necessarily refer to that as strategy, but those are the type of things that fall off that strategy. That now you need to create systems, processes, protocols, provide training if needed. An important part, even at the strategy level, is that you get everybody on board. And so, we talked about what does this mean to HR or who's responsible for developing an HR strategy. And I told you need input from everyone. It needs to be compliant and within the overall company strategy and definitely not going against it. But it should involve everybody who's responsible for implementing it, for facilitating it. So try and get as many of the HR department people involved and not, here is the strategy, go execute. Because again, I said that before in the previous, in part 1 of this series, that if you involve people, if they're part of developing this strategy, they own it. And you're going to see that ownership and the execution is going to be significantly higher. So what does this mean to HR? I already gave a few examples, the how-to. So let's take the how-to rules. Who do you hire? How do you define a candidate? I remember giving advice to a company that suffered from high turnover. And, it doesn't matter how we turn it around. And I'm telling you, I met with the CEO. The CEO was really doing a great job in, and I'm, me well enough to know that I don't use the words great job very lightly. But he was doing a great job in creating the right culture in the company. He created a culture that everybody's going to work in, no doubt, with one exception, the job itself. The job itself was very, very, very boring, very repetitive. You would end up doing the same thing maybe 4 or 5 times every day. Same thing. Very boring, very repetitive, very monotonous, something. And I thought to myself, and they were suffering high turnover, and the high turnover was not because of the culture. The culture was great. The job was boring. So the how-to rules, you need to hire people that thrive in a boring job. It sounds stupid. Maybe it sounds obvious, but nobody ever thought about that this is what you need to do. You need to hire people that do well in a boring job. And those are not bad people. Those are not stupid people. It's just that they have no problem with the boring job, whereas other people do, and use that as your screening mechanism. That would be a how-to rule, for example. So just think about those 5 types of rules and how do they apply to specifically to the parameters, the metrics that you're using to define where you are and where you want to be. Step 5, following directions, execution. We define where we are, we define where we want to be, we define the boundary, and we define the route, or the navigation system has calculated the route. We are starting to have self-driving cars, autonomous cars. Even autonomous cars, they don't drive blindly. Neither do you. When you drive the car, you don't drive you don't follow the instructions blindly. You look around. Things may have changed from what the navigation system knew about the route. You have the responsibility to realize that things have changed. And remember, one thing is that the driver has the final judgment. When you fly in an airplane, specifically an airliner, where there's the length of the runway is really important, you may have seen maybe videos of pilots taking off, and you hear this. They apply throttle. Whoever flies the plane applies throttle, then applies it all the way to full takeoff power. The plane starts running and running and running. The second pilot, whether it's the first officer to the pilot or the pilot to the first officer, starts reading the speeds. 60. We're at 80. And at some point they say V1. And pretty much right after they say V1, they also say rotate. Rotate is when you pull back on the stick or the yoke, whatever that plane has, and you actually take off. What is that V1? V1 is a calculated speed based on the weight of the plane, based on environmental conditions like the temperature, because the higher the temperature, the thinner the air is, the faster you're going to have to be on the ground to get a certain airspeed that would lift the plane. So there are a lot of things that go into the calculation of V1. But V1 essentially says if you hit V1, you don't have enough runway to stop the plane. There's one more thing that you know as a pilot. And typically, by the way, even 2-engine airliners, they can take off on one engine. So if you hit V1 and all of a sudden one engine blows off, you can still take off, fly around, land. It's going to be an emergency landing, but you can do it. And it happened. But you are the one that has the final judgment on, do I make a detour or do I not make a detour? Do I vary from the directions, whether it's V1 or anything else? So let me take you back to the ground. We're back in the car. You're the one that has the final judgment. You, the driver. Your final judgment may be affected not by danger or, unexpected construction on the road. It can just be, I want to go, I want to turn left here. I don't want to go straight in this road. I want to turn left here. I make the decision. Car is going to have to deal with the detour. We'll talk about that in a later stage, but you have the final judgment. What does that mean for strategy? In general, and actually with HR, this is where they stop being different. So I'm not going to specifically talk about HR strategy. This is when you follow the strategy. Every decision, the whole idea of a strategy is that it really needs to be a one-pager that everybody knows, everybody memorize, everybody remember, and it helps you. And even if you don't remember, you can look at it. Not a 40-page document, a one-pager. You can look at it, and every decision you need to make when you're not sure, look at the strategy statement. It's going to tell you what to do. You have two candidates, and you're not sure which one you like more. You look at the strategy. The strategy says, one of the how-to rules is hire people who can deal with a boring job. That would help you make that determination. I'm oversimplifying things, but you see where I'm going. Again, don't execute blindly. You are in the ultimate control. Maybe when you develop the strategy, when they develop the strategy, okay, you're executing it. Hopefully you were part of it, but they missed something. Maybe in the where we are, maybe in the where we want to go, maybe in the boundary, they missed something. You are in ultimate control. But deviations from the strategy should really be minimized. Maybe what you want to do is stop for a second, go talk to the people who developed the strategy, tell them, have you considered this? And maybe their answer is, yes, we have, stick to the strategy, but maybe not. Maybe they would want to change. When you execute, keep everyone involved and informed. Doing things in a vacuum does not really work to execute a strategy. Other people who are executing on that strategy need to know that you're doing your part and it's going well. Always continue to challenge the assumptions that led you to believe you know where you are or where you want to go, or what the boundaries are. The assumptions could be related to things inside the company or outside the company. You have to continue to observe the environment outside of the company. Monitor the process itself. Solve problems when needed, as guided by the strategy. If something has changed, again, and I said that several times already, if something has changed, it is your job, your responsibility to raise a red flag and say something has changed. We may need to do a detour. Again, nothing here is specific to HR, so everything that I just said on executing on a general strategy would apply to executing on an HR strategy. Step number 6 out of 7. How do we know that we got there? So this is getting there. Or how do we know that we're close to getting there? And you'll see why. In a car, it's very simple. The car navigation system will say you have arrived. And this is a pure geographic thing. It looks like where you are right now relative to where you want to be is less than 10 feet. So you're there. So it's pretty easy. You can see the place you wanted to go already. With a strategy, it's when you fulfilled the mission or the strategic intent. If your strategic intent was, and it could be different things. It could be reaching a certain milestone, reaching a certain revenue, market share. In HR, it could be we wanted to reduce the turnover rate from 40% annually to 20% annually. We're at 20% annually. As we measure it, we're there. We got there. I think one thing you need to make sure is that you really did get there. And so it's sustainable. It's not a one-time thing that, right now we're at 20%, but this is because of the timing of how we measure stuff and so on. And if we measure 3 months from now, then we're actually not at 20%, we're at 32%. So make sure that when you say that you got there, you actually did get there. It could happen sooner rather than later, sooner than expected. It could happen later than expected. So maybe your time horizon was we're going to get there in 2 years, from 40% to 20%. 2 years later, you're down at 27%. You know that what you're doing is working. You just realize that it's going to take longer. So fine. I mean, it's your decision. You can say, I'm good at 27. You can say, let's continue this strategy until we do hit the 20%. Or, you give up. But you have options, but you need to determine whether you really have arrived at where you wanted. And it's not just a matter of, within 2 years, we need to hit 20% turnover, reduce from 40 to 20% turnover, or increase the employee satisfaction that we currently measured at 10%, increase it to 17%, and you got to that number. So if you say we need to get to that number in 2 years, you didn't get in 2 years, it happened earlier, and you're certain that you are there, that's still good enough. That's better. it's definitely time to start a new strategy. I mean, you don't want to just stop and say, okay, we got nothing to do anymore. You want to form a new strategy. You may have wanted to do that before you actually reach the goal. So let's kind of take an example. Let's say this year, 2023, you defined a 5-year strategy. So that stretches until 2028. These are the type of things we want to achieve. This is where we are. This is where we want to be. These are the boundaries. And we want to get there within 5 years. Once a year, I would recommend, and again, there's no rocket science. There's no, magic in saying once a year. It's just like, we like doing things once a year basis, or once a quarter, once a month. It's just the predictability of when we're going to do that is important. So once every certain amount of time, revisit the strategy. What do you do when you revisit it? You ask yourself, where are we now? Are we sure that we still want to go to that specific place, the destination? Are we sure about the boundary conditions? Now, don't challenge it dramatically in like, let's start from scratch. No, don't start from scratch, because otherwise you're going to be changing directions every time you revisit the strategy. And so I want to even use the word revisit very carefully and say you want to just, have a checkpoint. Maybe that's a better definition. But let's say that you have defined that strategy in 2023, started executing. It's a 5-year strategy until 2028. In 2026, I would say let's start thinking about where we want to be 5 years from now. So 2031. And then I want to be very careful with using the word abandon, but you kind of abandon the old strategy to a modified one. So if you think about it, at 2023, you aimed at a certain point for 2028. It's 2026. You're on your way to get the 2028, but maybe it's time to start thinking about where you want to be in 2031 and either add elements to the strategy or remove elements from the strategy, or even just modify things from the strategy that will take you to 2031. So I don't want you to think of this as, every year you build a whole new strategy, a whole new 5-year strategy, and you completely abandon it. But I want you to think about it. Every year you make a course correction. The strategy will always remain a 5-year strategy. And again, remember, the 5-year is an arbitrary number that I gave you just as an example. I mean, your strategy might be a 3-month strategy, and it might be a 50-year strategy. But don't wait until you get there. Definitely not to define whether you did or did not. You want to know that way sooner rather than later. But along the way, just keep thinking 5 years out. In 2023, you're thinking 5 years out, you're at 2028, 2024, maybe you're revisiting it and saying, hey, let's start thinking about 2029, 5 years out. And are there any corrections we need to make now? One example would be, and I keep using the same parameter, employee turnover. You're at 40% turnover. You decided that within 2 years, you want to go to 20% turnover. A year later, you're going there and you're saying, well, we're at 25. Now let's ask ourselves, 2 years from now, where do we want to be? It's no longer 20%. Is it 15%? Is it 10%? Also remember, is it feasible? Are you trying to go for something? Are you going for a 0? Is it feasible? By the way, you learned a lot of things while executing this 1 year that would help you refine what your next 2 years target should be like. So that's kind of how you know that you got there. With a modification, and that is you may not want to go all the way there before you start thinking about where do you want to go afterwards and start planning to where you want to go afterwards. You may not end up crossing that line that you wanted to be in the previous strategy simply because you slightly modified it. And the last part of this analogy of developing and executing a strategy is what happens when there is an unexpected surprise. And this is where your car navigation system will say, recalculating. Actually, I don't think that it does say that anymore. I mean, it writes it on the screen, and today you can actually program whatever voice you want to have. I use Waze a lot to navigate as an app on my phone, and I had my daughter record the sounds, and so what she says when I change something or something has changed, she goes, "Daddy, you're not following instructions." So whatever it is, you need to recalculate. The road may be unexpectedly closed. You have to take a detour. That was not part of the original plan because your navigation system, your map, as updated as it might be, is not updated. And by the way, there's another part of the analogy I didn't think about that I should add here. And that is, how often do you update the map itself? What is the analogy of the map? It's the environment. Okay, it's the environment that allows you to define a path from where you are to where you want to be within certain boundaries. It used to be the navigation systems had a map that was loaded into them. And so for my car has something like that. Well, not anymore because I replaced the navigation system. Now I'm using an Apple AirPlay with my iPhone. And for exactly this reason, because instead of buying a CD every 1, 2, 3 years and updating the map, and then your map is not updated for another 1, 2, 3 years, things change very quickly. And today the maps are, well, if you use a phone and an app on your phone to navigate, then they get updated all the time. I mean, they just check what the conditions are known right now, and those conditions could even be updated by drivers who are driving, whether they're automatically being monitored by this app that says, hey, it looks like drivers along this route are driving very, very slowly. Maybe I should give you another route. But anyway, there's an unexpected surprise, whether map is updated all the time or once in 3 years, there's unexpected surprise. You need to recalculate a new route. In a navigation system in your car, it happens automatically. You don't have to ask it to recalculate. In strategy, this is kind of where the analogy kind of breaks apart. In strategy, this is not automatic. The recalculating of a new path is not automatic. It would happen because you couldn't perform as expected. You know, you thought you're going to be able to do what you set out to do within the strategy, but you couldn't. Maybe you did, but you didn't get the right results. This is where, you know, when you calculate the route, you need to really use all the information that you know, all the knowledge that you have and others have to say this is what needs to happen to get to those certain parameters, or these are the type of things that are required to reduce employee turnover rate. So, you know, I'll give you one example. It's a boring job. Really, the thing you need to do is start hiring people who deal with boring jobs, who feel comfortable with boring jobs, as opposed to people that need to be challenged all the time and need the excitement of something new every day. Maybe it's understanding the relationship between trust, which to me is the foundation for pretty much everything HR. Between that and any parameter that you want to measure. I mean, you know, we found, for example, others found before me that when you have high trust, when the trust is in the top quartile of trust in companies, employees are 50% more likely to stay with the company at least one more year. And by the way, 88% more likely to recommend that company to a friend or family member. So, you know, it's trust. So you didn't get the right results because, you know, you thought that relationship was working in a certain way or that you were doing certain things to get there and they didn't work. Maybe the environment has changed. You are the one who has, I mean, you obviously cannot continue to execute the same strategy without any changes. Obviously, something has to change. you're the one responsible for recalculating a new path. Ask yourself again the same questions you asked that I suggested you ask deep into the execution of the strategy. First, where are we? I mean, you don't want to get to the last minute and realize that you're not anywhere near. Let's say that your strategy is, how do I lose weight? And I want to go from 236 pounds down to 200 pounds within 6 months, which is not, shouldn't be very challenging. It's very doable, very feasible. But you don't want to wait until 6 months pass to go, well, I went from 236 down all the way to 235. No, that's a little late. So you want to keep track along the execution of the strategy to know that you are making the right progress and getting there. You're on the right path. So take inventory. Know where you are right now. Ask yourself if, doesn't look like we're getting there. Do we still want to go to the same destination? Maybe something has changed in our environment. Ask yourself that. Did anything change in our boundaries? We used to, our budget got tighter. And so maybe we need to adjust the strategy because our budget got tighter. Should the boundaries have changed? Maybe you just simply hit a roadblock and the destination has not changed. Your boundary conditions have not changed, and all you need to do is just recalculate a new path. So go back to, what was it, step 4, I think, where you calculate the route. Yep, it was step 4. So go back to step 4 and recalculate that path. You may actually, keep in mind what was the original path, but use it kind of more as a side document, as a support, because really what you have to do is redo step 4 altogether. So you know where you are. I mean, obviously, reassess where you are right now. You know where you want to go to. Maybe that has not changed. You know what the boundaries are. Maybe that has not changed. And just recalculate. So knowing where I am now, because it's not where I was supposed to be, going to the same place within the same boundaries, I need to take a slightly different route. Calculate that route. There is nothing special here for HR. It's the same things, and I actually used HR parameters for the most part. And that's pretty much it. This is how you develop an HR strategy. 7 steps, just like a navigation system. I'll take you again through what those 7 steps or 7 parts are. Part 1 was to know where you are right now. Part 2 was know where you want to go, what your destination is. It has to be meaningful, not meaningless and not stupid. It has to have the characteristics that would guide you. Know what your boundary conditions are, what you can and cannot, what you must and should not do by getting from here to there. Calculate the route, create simple rules, 2 to 5 simple rules. Follow those directions, execute on them, get everybody involved, and monitor your progress and to know if something is not happening, solve problems along the way. Know when you got there and possibly modify the strategy along the way to, take a new time horizon for it. And finally, know how to deal with unexpected surprises with detours. I hope this was helpful. This is the end of season 8. We will take 1 week break after that. And the week after that will be the first episode of season 9 and almost 100 episodes. Thank you for listening. What would you like to know about trust and trustworthiness? Let me know and I'll answer it in a future episode. I would love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@thetrustshow.com. If you like this episode, subscribe to the show so you will automatically get notified when I release a new episode. Rate it. Write a review for this podcast because those ratings help not only you, but also others looking for podcasts just like this. If you're looking for more resources to learn about how to build trust, be trusted, or know who to trust, look up my workshops, online courses, books, or go to my website, trusthabits.com. And remember that the answer to these two questions will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you, and can you trust me? Thank you for listening or watching The Trust Show.